Hello, everyone. Welcome to this first virtual video panel on bots and AI. So this is a new thing for us. We're going to try have a little discussion with a few people from the industry about the state of the industry. So my name is Sam Machin. I'm a developer advocate with Nexmo. I've been doing various things with some of the different AI platforms through our work with voice. And in the rest of the panel, I have with me Oscar Merry, who's the co-founder and CTO at Opearlo, which is a voice design agency based in London. Sid Lawrence, who's the CEO and co-founder of the bot platform. They're building lots of bots on Facebook, mostly, I believe. And Martin Beebe, who's a technical evangelist and not a co-founder at Microsoft. So thanks for joining us, guys. Let's dive straight in then, shall we, with the first question. So one of the things I think about is the kind of the current whole state of the union, if you want to call it, or whatever. What we mean by bots and AI and all these things. There's lots of talk about it, but one thing I was thinking is, where are we with the tech in terms of maturity? Like, if we compare it to, the kind of mobile PDA space, are we at the early Palm Pilot days, at the calculator watch days, or the iPhone days of it, or where is it? Who's got some thoughts on that?
I'm willing to give that one a stab. I reckon we're probably at the calculator watch stage. So, these things have been around for many years, not necessarily in the mainstream space, which is the biggest difference. So in the same way that, I reckon it's probably calculator watch stage for the majority of people. So there's obviously been a lot of press over the last 12 months about these things, being far better than they actually are. Thankfully, I think people are starting to understand more so what they are now. We've been building bots on IRC many years ago, and now it's just that it's on mainstream platforms. And they're not really that different to what they used to be. It's just that they're on mainstream platforms.
Okay. And anyone else got any sort of thoughts? Disagree? Agree? Disagree?
I sort of think that there is a slight jump in terms of what they're capable of compared to previously, and that's the kind of trying to figure out what a person's is actually saying to a system. I mean, most systems, most web applications, most mobile applications have always driven people down a very specific menu-driven kind of way of operating an application. And I think with chatbots and with voice bots, we're getting to a point where the user is able to explicitly ask for what they want. And we're kind of getting to the point where we understand what the user's saying, and we're able to fulfill certain needs that user has at that point. And I think that's where the real advancement is going to come in with bots, is when we start to understand more and more what the user's real intent is. At the moment, we can kind of, it's a bit of a trick. We're able to understand the intent relatively well with some of the cognitive services and various different artificial intelligence systems that most major companies are building. But I think over the next 2 or 3 years, we'll start to see leaps and bounds in that area where we really truly understand what the user's saying from freeform English, rather than having to drive a user down a very specific menu structure.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think for me, there's the big leap is, like I say, it's the difference between something being a command line driven. So, we're all geeks. We used to kind of typing in commands, and really the first generation of stuff was, yes, it was a bot sat in whatever your IRC channel or your instant messenger, but fundamentally you were typing in a command as a string, and you had to get it in a specific order and a specific syntax and that kind of thing. And I guess, the tipping point that starts to make it maybe a bit more AI is this idea that you haven't got to structure your request. It can figure out from the keywords and things in what you're asking for, isn't it? But yeah, okay, that's good. It's still definitely early days. I think we probably all agree on that.
A lot of the work that I've been doing recently, we build a lot of chatbots, but most of the customers which we're speaking to want to create some kind of voice system or voice control on top of that chatbot, as well as just creating plain chatbots. And so chat's one of those, or speech to text kind of algorithms, systems are I think are really at the sort of 2003 stage of the touch. If I look at the touch metaphor of like how touch phones were in 2003, 2004, when they were all just capacitive screens and they were totally rubbish, and that you would press on them and you would hammer different sections, but you never really got the thing that you wanted. And then all of a sudden the iPhone came out in 2007 and touch interfaces were forever changed. We're kind of in that 2004 moment with speech detection and speech intent, where things are kind of hit and miss. And yes, it sort of works, but it sort of doesn't as well. And it's really frustrating, and most users avoid it. But we're going to get to that pivotal point when speech and intent are fully understood by computer systems, and then we get to this magical moment where people then are far more accepting of the technology. But at the moment, I think for the vast majority of people, they can be quite frustrating, these AI systems and these speech systems.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's quite interesting that, again, it's a really good example actually. The whole, the touch interface. You had the stylus, and it was really like almost. It was really just a replacement for a mouse interface, which wasn't the same thing. And if you were careful, you could drive it. But for this stuff to kind of become user friendly, it's got to be easy to do while multitasking, while you're trying to get the shopping out of the car with one hand and hold the dog with the other, and then you want to be able to shout at it. It's no good sort of it recognizing you if I'm in a nice quiet room with a microphone and I walk up to the device and ask it in calm, plain English. It's when it can kind of work in that real world scenario, isn't it?
Yeah. One of the big limitations at the moment of chatbots is this onboarding experience. How do you explain to the user what they can say to the bot, what sentences they need to do, how they structure things, and that onboarding experience is really painful. And it's also because the bot doesn't really understand freeform English. It doesn't understand anything that the user could say to it. Generally speaking, it only understands a subset of English which it's been programmed to. And I think to get these things really successful, we're going to have to get past that.
Yeah, that's really good. Actually, that leads me on actually to the next point I was thinking about, which is kind of discovery. How do we, so we know within the app world we have sort of app stores and we can add things, and then we have an icon to launch it and orchestration. But one of the things I think still not quite worked out for bots specifically, and maybe it's more of a problem with voice, although even chatbots, is how do we launch one? How do we get to them? What's the discovery phase?
I think actually, whilst discovery of bots and specifically voice bots is a massive problem, I actually think the biggest issue is getting the use case right and making sure that you actually deliver on the promise of your voice app, because a lot of the marketing that the big tech companies put out there actually showcase these voice systems as, in a lot of cases, better than they actually are. And so when users come to the experience, they've got these really high expectations of what the particular voice app can actually do. And quite often on their first experience, they'll end up feeling very, very frustrated. So I think whilst there is a bit of a discovery problem with voice bots, I think what we always advise our clients on is, instead of worrying about that too much, just make sure that you've managed to set your expectations right and make sure you deliver on those expectations, especially on the first use, because we could come up with all of these clever ways to get our voice bots discovered in better ways and by more people. But if we still are leaving the majority of our users frustrated on the first use, then that's still going to be a big issue.
I mean, it's all about designing it correctly, right? I mean, it's they're not necessarily. It's the same with everything. Technology is there to solve a problem. It's not just there to be used for the sake of being used. And you've got to make sure that it's clear what you can and can't do. I mean, on like the voice discovery, so we do a lot of stuff in the music space. And kind of one of the big ongoing discussions at the moment is when you walk into a room and you just say, Alexa, play me some music. Sorry, everyone. I can't find any music in the library. Sorry.
As if on clue.
So when you do that and you aren't specifying what artist or what anything, like how do even the musicians get discovered? So is it then purely gatekeeper based on who puts them into different playlists? It will be interesting to see how it all pans out from a discovery in general when there's no screen or anything.
Yeah, I think it's both. When I say discovery and then even just orchestration, it's launching those things. You have that clutter of apps on your iPhone home screen that everyone's got. We can, but you can easily switch between them, and it's trying to remember how you go into the right thing you want at this time. Do I want Alexa to get me a pizza, or do I want her to tell me the traffic, or do I want her to do this? And that's definitely something that's harder.
So all of those apps that you mentioned, they do one thing. They do one thing well. It's kind of like this whole thing of the bots need to be designed so that Martin was chatting about the onboarding. So we call that kind of training wheels. So when you first start using a bot, it needs to be very clear what you can and can't do. Don't try and make your bot do everything in the world. Like, you're just going to fail unless you're creating like a master bot, like Siri, like her name that I'm not going to say, like Cortana, like if you're making one bot to rule them all, you're going to fail because there's going to be stuff that it won't be able to do. And in the same way as they all have, you play around with the Amazon Echo the first time you use it. You try and see how far you can push it. You get it to do stupid things, and then you stop using it for that, and you start using it for the tasks that you're trying to complete.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So yeah, definitely the kind of discovery and things, we need to have that playing with tech at stage for people, because it is something brand new, something people don't really understand yet, so they need that simple. I mean, it's many years ago when Windows first launched, and the whole concept of a GUI was brand new to people. I think that was one of the big reasons behind Solitaire, wasn't it? Well, Solitaire was a simple thing that everybody understood, but it was a way to practice your mouse skills and the idea of dragging and dropping and clicking around a screen and that kind of thing. So actually, yeah, we're kind of at that stage with people learning that I can talk to this thing and I can ask it things. So actually, that's why I can ask it to tell me a joke or tell me when, Obama's birthday is, or those kind of things. They're not necessarily the use cases or the things you're going to want it to do, as much as they're just nice, simple things that let you discover stuff. Cool. So, okay, let's move on to the next one. What do we think is a great use case, or where we are today with given the state of the tech and what the limitations are? What have people seen that are really nice use cases for bots, both voice and text today?
I think from the voice space, I think one kind of trend that we've definitely identified is around content. So complex applications that have a lot of different functionality on maybe mobile or web probably aren't best suited to transition to a voice app right now. However, if you've got a lot of content, and if you want to build a voice app as a content delivery channel, we find that really works well, because often people are using their Amazon Echo or Google Home from the comfort of their own home, maybe when they're relaxing on the sofa and chilled out. And so if you've got a large amount of content that you want to get out to your users, and it's something that your users could enjoy in the comfort of their own home, then a voice app could actually be a really good way of getting that content out there.
Yeah, and it's a fairly simple interaction, isn't it? You've just got those basic play, pause, next type commands, I suppose.
Exactly, which makes it it makes it a lot easier as you're navigating things like the voice interaction model design, and especially if you're a big brand or a big organization looking to kind of dip your toe in the water in the bot space. Building a content app is a lot easier than integrating with your existing web or mobile product.
Informational content, things, I don't know, recipes, that kind of thing. Is that something you think that's...
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, one of the things that we've worked with a number of different companies all trying to achieve sort of different sorts of things. One of the bots that I worked on last November was with Sage, and they have these huge accountancy packages like Sage 1 and Sage Line 500 and so forth. And they're using the bot to kind of interface or be the interface across all of their different product lines as a sort of a simple to use API or system. And one of the things that their users really like is this ability to quickly check on things like who owes them money, what their expenses are, or adding an expense very quickly. So it's a number of very specific commands that you can give the Peg bot, the Sage Peg bot. But they're sort of these snippets of information and data which actually are quite difficult to get from other systems. It's quite cumbersome to go into to necessarily go into Sage just to find out who owes you money. But being able to ask this your sort of personal assistant, this Peg bot for Sage, like who owes me money, and it just tells you how much people owe you and so forth very quickly, and getting that information quickly. I sort of think about it as a way of a discovery of company-wide information. So if you can ask very specific questions and then the bot somehow surfaces that information from your company, then that's a really helpful kind of bot. And I think it's a really great interface for those sorts of snippets of information from your organization, helping organizations understand themselves.
Give me a specific. I mean, I suppose the simply it's a bit like the weather forecast model, isn't it? What is the weather like? Who, it's that. There's a very specific question.
I mean, that's a very consumer focused kind of use case. Weather and Obama's birthday, as you use, but things like which person owes me the most money this month? What's my accountant? What's the accountancy of my company look like at the moment? has Martin Beebe looked at that document that I sent over to him yesterday? Who have I been dealing with mostly in email this month? Those sorts of organizational questions are where we're seeing lots of people use bots, trying to get data and information and insight from their businesses into a bot.
You think actually that maybe it ends up better to asking for, for output rather than input? So it's a case of what you ask it a fairly specific question, and then it provides you that information rather than you inputting data into a system or controlling a system. It's just about querying a system right now, or
most of the bots that I've used have been or built of been providing either information or accepting small amounts of information. One of the challenges in collecting information from bots is being able to make sure that you've got the right piece of information. Like the work we did with Sage on getting expenses, for example, it was quite difficult when a user would say, I've got an expense for food, it's £500. When they say that, they might say it in lots of different ways. So being able to extract the £500 and extract the category was really, really tricky. And didn't matter how much sort of artificial intelligence training we did, we still would get these edge cases where people would use the system in very different ways. And so when you get really complicated inputs, multivariable inputs, then it actually becomes very difficult to manage currently with bot technology. So I think that tends to mean that people are using bots more for information, and they're asking their bot to provide them with information. And that's where we're seeing the sweet spot from an enterprise point of view, is that people are able to use these bots to extract information from their businesses.
I think just building on that as well, one of the challenges that we see is whatever the information that the user wants to extract from the business, there's an exercise to make that content kind of bot ready or voice ready, because you might have your existing APIs that you use to query your accountancy data, for example, but the way that data is returned might not necessarily fit for a voice response through Alexa or Google Home. So there's definitely an exercise in all the projects we do of making the content voice ready so that it makes sense to hear it back from Alexa, because one of the things is that she does actually speak very, very slowly. And if you have a long response, your users are just going to get quite bored and drop off and not come back.
Yeah, we've all seen those kind of, especially it's hackathons and things, when they query the data or something and it reads out to a ridiculous number of decimal points or something. It's like, the temperature is 72.493761812 degrees. And it's like, it's that kind of stuff, like sanitizing and making it, I guess it's natural language. It's not natural language processing. It's a form of, taking structured data and building natural language. But then I guess I've often found it gets repetitive if it always tells you exactly the same thing. You want a few mixes in there. You don't want it to always read you the same thing with the same inflection. You want it to be able to just mix it up a bit to keep it kind of feeling more human, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think another great way to do that is to add contextual information from a different source as well. So, something as simple as pulling in data from maybe a weather API or something about the local area and varying the content based on that each time. It just adds a bit of variability. It makes it more as if it was a human telling you that they're able to add that additional context in. That's a great way to build kind of more personality into the experience.
One of the things we found is, so our stuff is, it's all, it's either text or button based. I mean, ultimately, it's kind of using Facebook Messenger as a platform, right? I mean, it's the Messenger platform. And there are so many different use cases for different people. Like, interestingly, a use case that is never really discussed is, messaging. I mean, it's Facebook Messenger. You can send messages. So we did a big thing for the BBC last week for the general election, where people could sign up for general election news and to find out when their vote for the constituency, when the count was done. And you got asked what your constituency was by your postcode. So 99% of the people entered a valid postcode because they knew exactly what type of data they should be adding. That we weren't asking them to say, I live in this postcode, SO23. We were just saying, what's your postcode? And then once the count was done, they all got sent messages. And we kind of, it's messaging, and the numbers are far higher than most other platforms. Sam, text, SMS. I mean, Nexmo are great at SMS. And what's the beautiful thing about SMS? Being able to send messages to people and they read them. Like, that is the thing that for us is the most interesting part about these messaging bots. I mean, people don't actually want to use them to chat with. They want to use them to complete specific tasks or find specific information. So I have to admit, I hate the word chatbot with kind of a bit of a passion. I get why people use it because there are so many different types of bots. But ultimately, people don't want to chat with these things. They want to use them to either access information or be told various bits and pieces.
Yeah, they maybe converse with them.
I really like about the a messaging platform, which is kind of not, it's not as easy to do, at least in other platforms, is the ability to send sort of proactive messages or messages after the fact, depending on the settings that they've agreed to with the bot on something like Facebook. You can when you have some new information, send them a message, like as you were describing there, Sid, about election results. That's something that they've opted into, and then at a later date you can send them information about that. And what's really cool about the user experience there is that if they're using Facebook Messenger on their phone, they're going to get notified of that, just like they would a regular message you're coming in from one of their friends as well. And we find that the open rate of those sorts of things is really high, far higher than say what you might get with an email send or even a tweet which you might send out as a company. And because it is personalized and because it is very specific to the information you requested, and that notification, a future notification or proactive messaging, is a really powerful understated value of these messaging platforms.
And for us, like, I think they're the pure value. Like, that is the actual business case. So like you're saying, Martin, the numbers are huge. Like, we get 99% read rates and anywhere between 20 and 40% click through. Like, if you compare that to email marketing, it's something stupid like 3,798% more effective. Now, like, you've got to obviously don't spam people and send people messages that they've actually requested and they want, that is useful. But like, if you do it well, like, it's just insane. Like, and I get a question a lot, which is, do you think it's just because these things are new? Now, personally, I don't really. I just think that people are going to be quite choosy with who they allow to do this. You're not going to follow like, oh, the other thing as well is if you want to. So we do quite a bit in music, and if an artist has got their tour dates are out, and like my favorite artist is just announced a tour, and I want to know when the tickets are on sale, and I want to know instantly when the tickets are on sale, without messaging bots. Your ways are I like them on Facebook, at which point I'm only going to see it if I'm part of the 2% organic reach, or if they boost to reach me, or if I'm on Facebook at the correct time. I might like them, follow them on Twitter. Ultimately, as we know, normal people don't use Twitter. And secondly, I will only see it if they tweet at the same minute that I'm on Twitter. Or thirdly, they might send it as an email, at which point it gets lost with all of my other spam. So there is no other way to get instant gratification unless you go down the route of SMS, which is like still super powerful. And SMS is the only standard that is everyone across the world uses. The problem is that it costs per message.
Yeah, it's a form of push notifications, really, isn't it? I mean, it's, this is the thing but actually, I'm not going to install an app for that, and I might have an app installed from C Tickets or somebody that might push me, but they'll just be telling me, when every artist's gone on, it's gone on stage, and I'm not interested in that. And once it's more of a controlled, specific push channel, isn't it, that you can subscribe to.
It's important to remember, though, that it is ultimately probably a push notification which is delivering it. I mean, it's probably the Facebook Messenger application which is delivering the push notification, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, it's a push, but again, it's the idea you said. It feels more personal. Push notifications that come from generically from apps with news. There's nothing more annoying than this app's pushing me a thing saying, "Oh, you should get this deal now," and I'm just like, "Yeah, go away." Whereas push message saying you have a new message.
Sid mentioned that he doesn't think it's going to get too crowded. I do worry about whether it will or not, though. At the moment, when you try and produce a bot, they're very clear about the kinds of messages you can send proactively, the kind of things that you can say. I do wonder or worry that that's going to be exploited or misused to the point where we could switch users off. And I think that's an area where people like Facebook are going to have to be really careful to make sure that people don't abuse those systems, because it would be very quick for users to stop notifications on Facebook and to break this whole system.
Yeah, it's down to the kind of the gatekeepers of each of these platforms, these environments. I think it's one of the things where I've always thought SMS has still maintained its value. I mean, Sid said, it costs money, and actually that's a feature because it costs money. It's kept organically helps to keep down the spam and the noise problem, because if this company's only going to send me a message, they're only going to spend a couple of cents sending me a message if it's got some value. So we can't just blat them out for every little thing. There's a certain aspect of control there. I mean, the other one is you have to bring in some sort of control, like I say with Facebook or with any of the platforms.
There's a couple of features that are all about designing, which is quite key on this. So I haven't seen many people do this on Facebook Messenger yet, but when you send out your notification, there are actually 3 types of notification you can do. So you can do one which is sound and vibration, which is like a pure push notification. Then there's one which is a silent push notification. And then there's a third, which is actually no push notification. It just appears in Messenger. So you can then send out kind of messages that are totally non-interruptive, but when the user next logs into Messenger, they see it.
So that's a feature of Facebook Messenger, is it? Sorry.
Yeah, correct.
Because I think there's something like that in iOS, certainly within push notifications. You can choose on a notification. I'm presuming they're just copying that through. It's just about using it sparingly. Kind of voice versus text. So we've just been talking about some of the advantages of text for chatbots, and there are some things with voice. Do we need both? What's the the pros and cons of each? Where is it a case of the right one for the right situation, and should things be available on both channels? Are there some things where I might want to be able to let the user have exactly the same experience on voice and text, or not?
I think some of the examples that Oscar was saying earlier, like recipes, or you're walking in from your car, like you've got your hands are full with shopping bags. I mean, that by far needs to be voice, like without a shadow of a doubt. I think there are certainly other contexts where, well, sometimes when you need a screen for feedback or screen for information, where voice has issues. But context is definitely important.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really important to remember as well is that voice and text chat are very, very different. We see a lot of companies that have maybe built a chatbot for Facebook Messenger and want to then move that over to Amazon Alexa, thinking that it will be a very simple process and we can just literally port it, and it doesn't work at all. And the same in the other way around. We see companies that have an Alexa app and they want to port that over to Facebook Messenger, and you really have to be careful doing that. You have to think about the context, as Sid said. I would say one thing where I do think eventually people and brands will need to be on both the chat platforms and voice, because people want to have that flexibility. One thing that we talk a lot about is the driving use case. So Ford, BMW, and VW have all announced that they're bringing Alexa into their new car models, and you're seeing other car companies follow with the other digital assistants. And I think driving is actually going to be like a really, really big use case for voice going forward. But having said that, you can definitely see the use case where, you're in your car, you're driving to work, you're interacting with your digital assistant there, and then as you get out of the car and you're walking maybe the next 5 minutes into the office, you continue that through Facebook Messenger. So I think you definitely have to think about both. But as Sid said, they're very, very different, and you have to think about the context.
One of the challenges I think with voice at the moment is if you get into the weeds of actually designing a system in voice, sometimes there are unexpected problems and hurdles that are very difficult to overcome with the current technology. So, for example, we built very recently an application with a company called Beezy. And they are an organization which tries to extract information from about their business. And so the use case is that the users in their car, and they're using their iPhone, and they're using the Beezy application, and they record on they activate with Siri, and they say, have we ever worked with Shell before, as in the oil company or whatever. And we got that working pretty simply, and it was quite straightforward to figure out the intent and recognize the company Shell. But then they were asking questions like, have we ever worked with the company Misco before? And Misco is actually not a very common word that's being used in the regular English language. It's very specific to that domain, or any company name. And so most of the voice systems are trained against general English. They're not trained against specific companies or their domain-specific language. Another example is I recently worked on a voice bot for Plexus Law. And Plexus Law have lots of legal English that they use inside of their dictations. And so, for example, they were asking about a claimant, and most of the regular speech services were returning, instead of saying claimant, they were referring that as clementine, like the orange. And obviously that then becomes really difficult to make any understanding of what the user actually wanted. So we've done a lot of research in our company on what we call custom speech recognition, which is like current speech technology, but where you can feed it with reams of sort of domain-specific language so it can be more and more accurate. And I think all of these scenarios around in-car, or I'm not daring to say Alexa again in case she pops up, but the Amazon-based chat assistants and various things, they're all based around generalized speech patterns. And I think if we want these things to really take off, we're going to need domain-specific language understanding into these systems as well. Per app, perhaps domain-specific language understanding.
Yeah. So the way I've deployed the device you deploy in your office and maybe it's even the different assistants, isn't it? I mean, I keep thinking, especially with the voice thing, that the idea that you have this one device that has Alexa in it, but actually I might want to have several different assistants. So I have Alexa might be how I manage my home. So I have all my smart home and shopping and domestic kind of stuff in there. And then I have a completely different assistant with a completely different name, which is how I handle my business stuff, called Moneypenny or something. And that kind of idea that we say, I want to talk to this one, and then that puts us into a domain, just like we open our work email or we open our personal email, or people have different personas, different hats, don't they?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges maybe with the Amazon one at the moment is that if you speak to that as the developer, you don't get access to the actual what they said, the WAV file, and the same with our Cortana implementation is that you don't get access to what the WAV file is, so you have to rely on their speech to text. So most of where we're doing more advanced speech to text systems, we're having to actually build that into apps ourselves rather than using these voice assistants. And I think that's a challenge which these large voice assistants or personal assistants are going to have to overcome somehow. We're going to have to give developers access to the WAV files, to the actual audio.
The reasonings I've seen for that, particularly with things like Alexa and Google Home and things, is that they're very worried about privacy right now. And obviously, by capturing the audio, that sort of, you don't know what's going on in the background and how much other information, the microphone in your home scenario is very commercial. So by kind of sanitizing it first,
it's clearly not a technical issue. It's purely a privacy issue, which is going to. But that's again, for the success of these systems, that's going to have to be something that we figure out. Privacy around voice and around video as well. They're going to be really important things that we have to work with users about, because users are quite uncomfortable to share some of this stuff, and rightly so. And how do we maintain people's privacy whilst also doing great, really clever things for them as well with voice assistants and video assistants?
Yeah, because the more information we get, the better the assistant can be. But the more information you get, the worse the privacy case is. It's finding that balance, isn't it?
It's only as good as the data available.
Absolutely. So let's get a bit more technical this time. So kind of one of the things I've noticed that particularly by looking across different platforms, so I've been doing stuff with IBM Watson, with Microsoft's cognitive services, with Amazon's Alexa and Lex, and the Google API AI, Google Assistant, that everybody's got kind of different, everybody's doing roughly the same thing in a set of APIs. They've all got a thing, they've got a speech to text thing, they've got some kind of natural language processing thing, they've got some kind of runtime thing, but they're calling them different names, different terminology. Is anybody sort of seeing any, for example, people talk about bot platforms. What is a bot platform? Sid, that's your company.
Before we launched as the bot platform, they weren't called bot platforms. So we've been building our system out since last April, and there were a few what was called bot builders kind of launched. We believed that what we were creating wasn't just a bot builder, but it was a whole platform for not just bots, but also extending bots. and kind of doing some various bits and pieces that we do behind the scenes. So we launched the bot platform. Then in the last kind of 3 months, I've noticed everyone has started to call them bot platforms. And now that makes it look like well, I can't work out whether it's a good thing because we were out first, or whether it's a bad thing because people now just think that we're only called the bot platform because people are calling them bot platforms. So ultimately, our initial aim was we've been building out a system to allow other people to create their own messaging bots. Now, what we've actually realized in the last kind of 6 months is that people have got no idea what to do when they're presented with a technical solution like this. So, I mean, it's not technical. It's a kind of, you could describe it as a CMS to a degree. So what we're now doing is we're offering a service solution where we help build out the bot for them or with them to begin with, and then hand over the technical solution later. But yeah, ultimately they weren't called bot platforms until we launched the bot platform. So that's my answer to that question.
So, I mean, one of the debates I've been on here is, to me, but I mean, the bot platform has to have certain things. Like Facebook Messenger on its own isn't a bot platform, is it?
We call that a we would describe that as a channel in our terminology. So Skype or Facebook or whatever your platform, or Kik or whatever, or Slack, we call them channels. And then we have a framework, a bot framework, which spans all of those things. So you can build for all of those things with one bot. With one bot framework, you can build for all those platforms. But yeah, for all those platforms, for all those channels. See, we're getting confused with the terminology already. I'm trying to help with the terminology and making more ambiguity. But yeah, it's we would call those channels, and then we have a bot framework. We don't actually call it bot platform because we recognised that Sid was there first, so we didn't want to disrupt that area.
I think that's definitely the channel. You know, channel is one of the things I'm seeing as an emerging terminology that the channel is how the user accesses the bot, because the bot itself is, and most of these channels are really communication channels. They're originally designed for person-to-person chat primarily. Slack is a way you communicate with other people. It's just where the only difference is that instead of communicating with a person, you're communicating with a bot. So the bot itself is living. Is no more part of the channel than I am as the user. The channel is what connects me and the bot. And I suppose in some of the more closely coupled systems, like Alexa, perhaps it's all in one. But as we talk about building things on existing communication channels, then yes, then we definitely, there's a separation between the bot. So Martin, what is your framework? What does your framework do at a generic kind of level? What's the features that make that up?
Roughly, it's a framework, a development kit, an SDK, which works in either Node or C#, and you build this bot, and both of those different languages work slightly differently. But roughly speaking, we have a pattern for getting a message coming in and then passing messages back, and we span all of the platforms. So you would build one bot using either Node or C#.
It spans all the channels.
Did I say platforms? Great. I span all the channels, and the idea being is you build one of these things, and then we sort of stand there as an intermediary, making sure that it's available on all of the different channels for you, but you build one bot. More recently as well, you can respond with different responses depending on the channel that you're speaking on. So if I'm building a Facebook Messenger bot, for example, I probably want to be heavy on the UI, because Facebook Messenger guidelines talk about buttons and carousels and things like that. But on some of the channels, they're much more restrictive about what the interface looks like. And maybe you're just delivering text in those instances, or buttons or whatnot. So we build one bot, but you can respond differently depending on the channel and the way that the message comes into you. But it's the reason, the kind of the proposition that Microsoft are offering is this saving of money. You build one single bot, and then you can make it available on Skype, Facebook Messenger, and Slack.
What was the old adage of Java? Write once, run everywhere.
Yeah, we're in. That's kind of the idea, is trying to make it simpler and simpler. And the hope is that as more and more channels come on, you can take the benefit of those without having to do very little development work. And that's when we're looking at international clients, that's really an important aspect of that, because depending on the geography that you live in, different messaging platforms are more important in different geographies. So someone which is building a bot for maybe a Chinese audience would be looking at a whole different slew of social networks than someone which is looking to build one for North America. So that's the concept that we're trying to deliver or help with to make developers more productive, because that's ultimately our game.
So your framework, so actually, I mean, within that, to me, there's probably a few things rolled in there, because you've got you take the incoming messages from the channel, and that's the entry point into your framework. But then presumably there's some sort of natural language processing, potentially speech to text, then natural language processing.
You absolutely can, but you don't have to. Obviously, if you want to, it's very, very simple to add in natural language understanding, or we call it Lewis, language understanding service. It's an Azure service that you just add in language understanding, and then you can tie that up to different functions based upon the intent of the user. It's very straightforward to kind of use. But you don't need to use any of that. I mean, it's up to you.
You can just take the raw channel input into your code, then whatever the user's typed into the messenger or whatever can be fed to your code.
Absolutely. You could basically have your bot intelligence could all be based on regex if you really were wanting to do that. But generally speaking, we would recommend, in most instances at least, to have some kind of language understanding service rather than trying to figure out what the user's trying to do in your bot. And most of the examples we generate include that. But yeah, you can. There's lots of different services we offer. We offer a Q&A service, for example. So you load up all of your questions and answers, and we can serve that up as a bot for you very quickly and simply. You can do that almost with no code using Azure Functions as well, which if you're familiar with AWS, they have this stack called Lambda, which is like a serverless stack. We also have that same thing. It's called Azure Functions, and you can just, with a couple of clicks, deploy a bot to that, upload a question and answers sort of Excel spreadsheet, and it will then, your bot will be able to answer questions on a frequently asked question bot sort of thing.
I've had a little play with that, actually. Yes, it's rather a cool way to get to your first bot. I think it took a Word document even for me. It wanted a just question answer.
It will take a web page with a Q&A on it and convert that into a Q&A bot. It's surprisingly accurate. It's not just doing pattern matching. It's doing natural language understanding, then mapping that. It's doing text rank and all that sort of clever machine learning stuff behind the scenes. But you, as a user, you can build a Q&A bot very, very quickly using something like that.
Yeah, Oscar, what are you guys kind of finding with particularly around the platforms? I mean, you're predominantly building on Alexa and I think Google Home, so the very much the consumer vertical platforms. But how are you finding the kind of platform tooling environments for that?
So I think one big challenge is that as cross-platform on voice becomes more important, it is a little bit of a challenge to actually build for cross-platform voice. And I think we will start to see additional tools and additional platforms and SDKs that actually help developers build for cross-platform. What we advise right now is don't worry too much about it. If you want to build for voice, just focus on Alexa, because it's got the kind of biggest user base, and learn the lessons for voice on one platform, and then at a later date you can expand it to Google, you can expand it to Cortana if you want. But I think, yeah, cross-platform going forward is going to be really important, and right now it is a bit of a challenge. To give you an example, with the Google Home device and Google's platform, it's actually very confusing as a developer, because there's actually two different ways you can build Google Actions. You can either use API.ai, which in itself is its own kind of bot platform, or you can just use the Google Actions SDK and set it up that way. And if you're a brand, there's like a lot to digest there. So that is a big, I think, blocker to people really scaling their voice apps across all of the different platforms. And I think we will see like additional tooling, additional SDKs, additional frameworks come out to make that easier.
I guess it's a little bit like it was with mobile apps, well, probably now 10 years ago, when we had iOS and Android, and you had to build for one and then the other. And then we started to see things like PhoneGap and these kind of platforms for building certainly the simpler stuff, where actually you can build a single, there's probably an interesting market there for a PhoneGap of voice platforms or something.
There is a lot of stuff you can reuse across the different platforms. Like the things I've talked about so far around making sure your content is voice ready, so that the content that the digital assistant responds with makes sense over voice. All of that stuff you can reuse from platform to platform, and all of those learnings you can get from just one platform. But yeah, I definitely think there's an opportunity for those types of tools.
I don't think it's as bad as you described there, Sam. It's not really like iOS and Android were, in my opinion, because they have very deep-rooted kind of things into the operating system, which are very difficult to make cross-platform, and it's a huge developer effort to make cross-platform. Most of the differences between Google Home, Alexa, and Cortana, they're usually not that deep embedded into the operating system. I know for at least porting Alexa to Cortana skills, it's actually they've tried to make it as simple as possible and as easy as possible. So whilst there probably is an opportunity for someone to make it even simpler, I don't think we're really in the problem space that we were with mobile apps with iOS and Android. It's not that different. They're not that different.
It's still an interface, isn't it? It's what you just pass back and forward, kind of. You're still putting in some text. You're getting a structured request, and you're structuring a response. It's always request response, and you're not dealing with low level stuff in the same way, I guess.
You not have to recompiling the application, creating completely different system calls, and potentially being on completely different processors. It's not that level of difficulty with cross-platform. It's much higher level than that. Whilst there's still problems, don't get me wrong. It's not. I don't think you're tightly coupled to the platform, to the channel, to the bot framework, whatever, as you would be with the mobile application space.
I think it's less around porting your applications. We've actually ported quite a few Alexa skills over to Cortana, and you guys have made that really easy, actually. I think it's more about what you do after your voice app is live. So what we find on our client projects is that as soon as you get your voice app live, that's just the beginning, and that's where you start to get real insight into what people are doing, why people are frustrated, and you can update any back-end code or back-end logic. That's fine to update cross-platform because you can just do that. Where the challenge comes in is if you want to update a portion of the voice model on the Alexa developer portal, and then you want to also do that for your Google action that's built through API.ai, and then you also want to do that for Cortana. It's those kind of things that is actually, from a workflow perspective, is quite difficult to manage, because you have to think, have I updated it here? Have I updated it here? Have I updated it here? That often requires going through some kind of recertification process. And it's more the management after you've got a voice app live on all of the different platforms that's just quite tricky to manage as a workflow.
I mean, do you find it then, presumably you manage them as separate, although they may be doing the same thing, they're actually separate apps, packages, skills, whatever you want to call them, and they have to have their own, and you may not have. So you may get different versions if you're like, oh, that feature's live on Alexa but not live on Cortana yet, or
yeah. So we always try and share as much of the kind of back end logic as we can, because a lot of it can be reused. But yeah, definitely the kind of however you define the voice model inputs that you give over to Alexa or Google or Microsoft, those things we keep separate.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I found, Spell, is that the tooling, particularly around building those voice models and things, a lot of them seem to be very very browser based. I mean, predominantly it's mostly with Alexa and this, but you're spending ages typing and clicking stuff into boxes, and to try and take a lot of the actual code, the traditional Node, Python, C# business logic of your bot is actually a very small piece of the bot, isn't it? There's a lot more structured data, probably in something like JSON or YAML or some form of syntax, but it's not. You can't easily just check that into GitHub and check it out and run a build. You have to copy and paste a lot of it in. Do other people sort of find that? Or?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a big challenge, and I think I'm sure there are some solutions to that on the horizon, because it does slow people down as they're making updates and making their bots and their voice apps better.
That is true, actually. A lot of the cognitive services aspects of it previously required, in the Microsoft world at least, required you to go into a browser to kind of do those things. I think we're getting past that now, at least on our platform. Almost every single one of them has code-based APIs where we can do a push. So that Q&A one that I was talking about, for example, you don't have to forward that over to a URL. Now you can actually directly get to the API. So most of a build for a bot for us would be done in our kind of DevOps platform, which for us would be Visual Studio Online. So we would be building all of the build things that when we do a deploy to Git or whatever our source control is, that would be the way that we would construct the entire bot. And there'll be lots of different build processes that it's going through, but now they are all codable. I'm not having to log into a website necessarily to update my Lewis model or to update my Q&A database. I can do that all programmatically. So it's kind of, for the larger sort of scale systems where we need a more defined workflow, we are able, at least on the Microsoft aspect of it, I'm able to code that in a sort of DevOps pattern so we can release with confidence. But that's not really nice. But then there are edge cases to that where, a new preview service comes out that we want to use that doesn't have an API yet. Which always really irritates me when they release a web front end to something but don't actually have a code API that I could ultimately push things through. But yeah, I think that's as these things become more real and more sort of serious, then you have to have a DevOps kind of release platform for it.
Yeah, Sid, you're nodding. I mean, I guess you're a bit lucky because you guys are building this platform, this back end, whatever we're going to call it, engine framework. And how do you guys manage things like deployments and stuff?
I mean, so we have various things ourselves. We've got our own API that some of our customers are hooking into to kind of extend it. We've got our system that has got, we're working with bigger and bigger customers who need a whole deployment system, deployment process themselves, right? Where it can't just be a case of X person logs in and updates and boom, done, everything's ready, because ultimately they have approval processes themselves. And so it's a completely different paradigm. But yeah, we also have kind of approval processes as well as APIs to kind of do stuff more powerfully on top of our platform.
Cool. Well, thanks, guys. That's kind of all the questions I had. I don't know. Should we maybe go around and see if there's anything else we want to kind of, anybody got any thoughts they want to discuss or bring up?
I've got a question for Oscar. Oscar, seeing as you've probably got more experience than I do building with that lady in the corner, it's all right. Mine will go off. When do you think they're going to stop having to do the whole tell X to do Y? Because at Christmas, me and my girlfriend wanted to make a skill so that we would walk into the house and would say, Alexa, make Christmas happen. At which point the Christmas tree lights would turn on, the main lights would dim down, and Mariah Carey would start playing on the speakers. Now, ultimately, the only way we could get that to work was to name an app The Elves. And so then it was, Alexa, tell the elves to make Christmas happen. That I found super frustrating. Now, hopefully they've either fixed it soon or they're going to. What's your opinion on that, Oscar?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting point, and it's one that we actually think about a lot. So choosing the invocation name for your skill is a massive, massive decision when you're building a voice app for Alexa. Precisely for that reason, because it's an additional barrier for people to actually use your voice app. For one, people don't have the icon on the mobile app to remember where to go to actually use your app. They need to actually remember the invocation name. So one of the things it has to do is kind of be memorable and do what it says on the tin. Having said that, you don't want to have something that is too clunky and causes the frustration that you've just described. One of the things we often look at, which works really well, is if you can try and hide the invocation name from the user so that when they actually open up the skill, they don't feel like they're using a custom app. They feel like the functionality is actually native. So in the example you described around Christmas, you could have just maybe called the skill make Christmas happen as the invocation name. So therefore, you just say, Alexa, make Christmas happen. And from the user's point of view, it doesn't feel like they're even using a custom app. It feels like the native functionality. And Amazon will let you do that as long as you go within the invocation guidelines. So that's one clever thing you can do. And actually, what we've seen is that skills that do that get a lot more usage. But then obviously, if you're trying to hide the invocation name and you're calling your skill "Make Christmas Happen," then you're limiting yourself in other areas, because if you want to expand the feature set, then suddenly it doesn't make sense. Well, that's one thing you can do. And what we also find is that what we hear some people are doing is, instead of trying to fit all of your functionality into one particular voice app, you could maybe build 5 different ones that are all, from the same app, or they each have a different invocation name that's actually hidden for that particular use case. So that's one thing you can do. Having said that, I do think that the companies that build the actual digital assistants are aware of this problem. And I think eventually we will see ways that people won't have to use the invocation name. So maybe they remove them entirely, and then they kind of, depending on what the user's request was, they say, would you like me to do that from this skill? So I do think eventually there'll be better solutions. But for now, yeah, trying to hide the invocation name is a great way to go.
Do you think there's a potential for invocation names to become like domain names where they're traded?
I think maybe, but I think with Alexa, there's no kind of restriction on domain names unless you're a branded skill. So there can be multiple skills called "Make Christmas Happen," and as a user, I'm only able to enable one of them. So I don't think so, really. What I do think will probably happen is there'll be this kind of concept of like voice SEO, where there's 2 voice applications that do the same kind of thing, and the platforms will actually decide which one to suggest based on the user's command. So it could be, Alexa, order me a pizza. I haven't got any pizza skills enabled, and then somehow Alexa will figure out to suggest Domino's or to suggest Pizza Hut, and there'll be some way of you optimizing your voice app to kind of get to the top of that suggestion.
Or there's a very nice market in buying, like AdWords, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah, all that.
Fantastic revenue stream of who's going to bid on the pizza. Pizza's the obvious one. Alexa, I want a pepperoni pizza. It says, would you like me to order from X? And it's who gets to be X. Exactly. That's just bidding, isn't it? That's pure AdWords SEO, or AdWords as you'll bid on a keyword for that.
I hope it's not Pizza Hut which win that role.
Other pizza manufacturers are available.
I hope it's not Domino's either.
Unfortunately, the little independent pizza place in my village, that the menu is just they have one image on their Facebook page, which is a photograph of their menu, and that's their entire online presence. They make great pizza, but
That's one of the things where a personal assistant, the idea of these personal assistants, they need to be personal. They need to start understanding that I don't like Pizza Hut pizza, and that Sid doesn't like Domino's, and that you like to order things from restaurants that only have one image on their Facebook page. It needs to get to know us, I guess, before they can suggest the right place to buy things from.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Is it going to be personal? How personal is it going to be versus how sold, how corporate, how advertised is it going to be?
I guess that'll end up being who pays for the system. If you're a user paying some kind of membership to that system, then you'll probably get your choices. And if you're not, and if the system's provided free, then you're probably going to be advertised to.
Unless they go down the Sky route, where you're the paying customer and you're being advertised to.
Yes, definitely not having the Sky bot anymore. Or where they decide to change things, and you've been using it quite happily for the last 6 months, ordering yourself a pizza every Friday night. But we've signed a new deal, and this week you're getting your pizza from this unknown weird pizza place.
From Crap Pizzas.
Brought to you by our new partner. We've improved your pizza experience. Martin, anything else you wanted to discuss, think about?
No, I suspect the only thing about this whole bot space is that I've only been involved really in it building stuff for about 6 to 7 months. And from the beginning of that time to now, things have massively changed about how we build bots, how we recommend it to customers to build bots. And I suspect that this is a really fast-moving industry. There's lots of different channels coming up all the time. There's lots of different capabilities. I think we're really on the cusp of what's going to come next. And I suspect in 6 months' time and maybe a year's time, things will look very, very different to what they look like now.
Yeah, it's definitely moving very, very fast. Which always surprises me as to, for years, I've always thought speech certainly was never going to be an interface. Yeah, I mean, how long have we had things like drag and dictate, or that kind of idea that you could talk to your computer to? I remember when I was at school. I mean, that's 15 years ago or something. The idea that I wouldn't have to type out my essay, I could just read my essay to the computer, and it would do the typing, and it never worked. And things.
That's exactly how that touch metaphor that I was using about 2004. That's exactly how touch interfaces were. Lots of people would say you could never use touch as the main input for your system. You always have to have mouse and keyboard. It's just the way it is. And then that proved not to be true. And I think that whilst speech is a much harder problem to solve, it will be solved, and it will be solved very quickly. And there will be a point in time when the input to systems will generally be led by voice. And I think that's a scary but also really interesting, because that changes lots of things. Like if you don't need devices anymore with screens, then there's lots of different scenarios which open up, and it changes the way we interact with technology. It's just a matter of when that's going to happen, not if, I think.
Interesting. So you actually think that we'll end up driving our computers more, doing our work, as well as just going via voice interfaces and AI type assistants? Or
precisely, that's completely conceivable, and that's definitely the way that speech systems are being developed. They're trying to understand more and more natural language, but I think that they will become ambient computing devices, which you don't necessarily have to have a screen in front of you. You don't necessarily have to have a touch interface. It will be much more voice led. I don't see any reason why that couldn't be achieved in the next 10 or so years. And that will be the operating system. Your speech will be your operating system.
Cool and scary at the same time, I think. But we'll still get it. It's Star Trek, isn't it?
That's why, if you look at every major technology company, that's why they're investing so much in speech, because that's the way that they see their operating systems being used in the future. That's why it's so important and critical, and why billions of dollars of research are going into speech right now.
Oscar, was there anything else you wanted to mention?
I think we've covered it all off. I think one thing that I always talk about when I'm at meetups or on talks like this is just that I think the future that Martin's describing will come quicker than a lot of people realize, and we'll get to a point very quickly where every home has a digital assistant in it, and people just start using that as the first kind of interface to their brand. And I think that's going to happen a lot faster than a lot of people realize.
Yeah, exactly. It happened with touch like that. It was literally a space of a year where touch stopped being rubbish to being excellent. And it's going to happen with speech, I think, as well. And
right now, a lot of people don't realize or don't believe that will happen, because the reality is that the technology still isn't quite there yet, and people are still having these frustrated experiences that we've been talking about. So a lot of people are saying, no, that technology is rubbish, but there will be that moment where the technology suddenly gets good enough that the majority of people's experiences are really good, and that'll be it.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, guys. So just to wrap it up there, I think. So just once again, thank you very much to Martin Beebe from Microsoft, to Oscar Merry from Opearlo, and to Sid Lawrence from the Bot Platform. My name is Sam Machin. I'm a developer advocate with Nexmo. You can find more stuff about us on the Nexmo blog, on our community Slack, and also lots of example code on our community GitHub. Thanks very much, guys. Cheers.